think first, or should
you go with what you think first?
I felt stylistically that was the most important yet. Because we've seen Starmer deploy detail and evidence, and we've seen Johnson try to ride roughshod over it. But there was one moment, Theo, which I felt was perhaps the most illustrative of all.
Go on.
And that was the moment where a backbencher clearly shouted something about you're supposed to be in support of it. And Starmer rose like a salmon to the fly. And he was about to gobble the fly. So he sort of went like this. He sort of went, well, of course I'm... And he stopped. And that, for me, was the most significant moment of all, stylistically, not substantively, because I think they have calculated that an almost preternatural level of calmness is by far the most effective foil or weapon with which to fight this increasingly hollow bluster. And I use this word advisedly, but this week I think it applies. Histrionics.
Because, of course, the House of Commons is not full, because there's social distancing, and so that enables Keir Starmer to catch himself. He doesn't need to... The febrile atmosphere in the chamber works against him, is the point that you're making. Of course, when that did emerge with that one backbencher saying, well, why aren't you supporting us? A Conservative backbencher saying, why aren't you supporting us? Keir Starmer puts that to one side, sticks to his questions and tries to unpick what the Prime Minister is doing.
But even when the febrile atmosphere returns, I'd be fascinated to see whether...
It'll be more difficult.
Well, it may be more difficult, but will it be any less effective? Because if he's standing there calmly reiterating facts and evidence, however loudly the backbenchers might be baying their largely bogus support for... Because, you know, they were cheering stuff there, which if it was written down on paper, you wouldn't be able to explain what it meant. So I'd be very... you're almost certainly right, because the thing about baying mobs is that they don't admit much textual analysis. But that for me was... I mean, you were right, it was a blockbuster, although not perhaps in the sense that word normally conveys.
What Keir Starmer does, and what he did during this PMQs more than any other, is that he lays out the reality of the situation. He makes a mildly rhetorical point about that situation, about his judgment or what view it casts on the government, and then he asks an incisive question. And so each question is... Each point, as he sets out the scene, is linked to the previous point. So Keir Starmer starting with the 11-day delay to bring in restrictions in Leicester. So prescient of you to invite John Byrne Murdoch onto your programme.
I know.
Because, of course, that was exactly what Keir Starmer was referring to. Boris Johnson saying that the government knew that there was an issue on June the 8th and sent in mobile testing units. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister said it was not possible to get the results from that initial response, but he insisted that the government acted decisively. Keir Starmer then comes back and says, well, we lost a week. You lost a week in getting the virus under control. And then brings in the next question 2, to say, well, can you ensure that that mistake will not be repeated in other parts of the country? And the Prime Minister, of course, came back and said the government faced problems in getting people to understand what they needed to do. But, of course, the question, what we've heard from Peter Salisbury, Sir Peter Salisbury, the Mayor of Leicester, is that there was no support or help from the government initially because they weren't getting the data, so they didn't realise they had a problem in the first place.
I agree 100% here. Keir Starmer is a professional. Boris Johnson is a buffoon. Keir Starmer is like a student who has passed an entire year, spent an entire year sitting down with his professor, going through all the details of the subject that he has to present on the day of the exam. While Boris Johnson is the type of student who arrives at the university on the day of the exam and discovers that there is an actual exam to sit. I actually find it a pleasure to listen to Keir Starmer respond to Boris Johnson and destroy his bluster. That's all Boris Johnson seems to have. Slogans and bluster. He doesn't actually have any rhetorical response to the challenges or the questions that are asked of him. You can see it on a daily basis, how he avoids the question, starts talking about something else, or attacks the opposition for simply raising that issue. Let me make it clear, I'm not saying that Boris Johnson is not a qualified and articulate politician. He knows exactly what to say in order to maintain his base, but he is clearly no match for Keir Starmer. Boris Johnson's base are the Brexiteers, the people who have agreed to something that doesn't make any sense anymore. They are the same people who bought Dominic Cummings' slogans, hook, line and sinker. They're somewhat comparable to the Trump supporters in the United States, people who switch off their brain when the leader speaks. And in the same way that when Boris Johnson is speaking, many Brexiteers, many people who voted for him in December last, will switch off their brains and cheer him on, even in some cases when they know it's a lie. So I believe that Keir Starmer is somewhat helped by the empty Parliament chamber. He's able to focus, he's not getting distracted, and he's able to respond with precision to Boris Johnson's rants. Now, this could change if Parliament refills and he gets drowned out by the backbenchers on the other side. Now, Boris Johnson is desperate to get Parliament refilled in order to give him moral support during PMQs. And you can see how Jacob Rees-Mogg, the leader of the House, is pushing continually against the idea of maintaining a situation where MPs can ask questions remotely because of the pandemic. Now, some will say that Keir Starmer hasn't truly been tested yet, and I understand this position. But if you look at what Keir Starmer is presenting, he's building a case, as I've said before, against Boris Johnson and the Tories. And I think he has a folder full of things to say that would be applicable not just to Boris Johnson, but to any Tory leader who potentially may fill Boris Johnson's shoes later on. Let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun? If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.